The air in the decaying golf clubhouse always tasted of dust and forgotten ambition. My breath fogged briefly in the chill, a testament to the structure's failing heating and my own endless hours spent hunched over a makeshift workstation. The windows, streaked with grime and spider silk, offered only a muted gray view of what used to be manicured greens, now an unruly expanse of stubborn weeds and forgotten flags. Even the silence here was thick, punctuated only by the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the distant, unseen kitchen and the occasional rustle of something small scuttling behind the peeling wallpaper. My makeshift workstation, a battered card table shoved into a corner of the main lounge, was an island of sleek, humming technology amidst the decay. Empty coffee mugs, a stack of energy bar wrappers, and a worn notebook filled with arcane symbols and meticulous observations surrounded the central piece, the Nexus headset. Polished obsidian and silver, it sat waiting, a beacon. It was my anchor, my escape, my everything. I stretched, my back protesting with a series of dull pops. My fingers, accustomed to the intricate haptic feedback of virtual interfaces, felt clumsy and thick in the real, cold air. For weeks, months even, I'd been here, a dedicated beta tester, pushing the boundaries of this revolutionary system. Others had their labs, their clean rooms, their sterile environments. I preferred the solitude of this forgotten place. Here, the contrast was sharper, the escape more profound. The deeper the desolation around me, the brighter Nexus shone. I settled into the worn armchair, the springs groaning in protest, a familiar complaint. The synthetic leather, cracked and faded, offered little comfort. My fingers brushed the cool, smooth surface of the headset. A spark of anticipation, a familiar thrill ignited in my chest. This wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was a promise, a gateway. I lifted the headset and carefully positioned it over my eyes, adjusting the straps until the weight felt balanced, almost imperceptible. The outside world, the musty air of the clubhouse, the gray light, the distant drip, it all dissolved. The musty scent gave way to the crisp, clean aroma of a virtual pine forest, damp earth and resin. Sunlight, impossibly warm and golden, dappled through needle-thin leaves, painting shifting patterns on a forest floor carpeted with emerald moss. The silence was absolute, save for the whisper of an artificial breeze and the distant, melodic chime of virtual birdsong, each note perfectly rendered, resonating with a clarity that made my ears ache with pleasure. This was Nexus, flawless, immersive, a universe meticulously crafted, offering an escape so profound it made my real life feel like a faded photograph, a distant memory I had no desire to revisit. Every pixel, every sonic nuance, every haptic feedback, I knew them intimately, cataloging imperfections, reporting anomalies. But there had been so few. Nexus was a triumph, a testament to what humanity could achieve when it truly reached for connection, for an alternate reality. I was part of something monumental, something that would redefine existence. This dedication fueled me, pushing me through the long nights and the growing ache in my bones. Today, I was exploring a newly implemented biome, a sprawling coral reef, its vibrant life teeming with impossible colors. Schools of iridescent fish, programmed with uncanny realism, darted past my virtual hand, their movements fluid and natural. I felt the gentle push and pull of the virtual currents, the tickle of microscopic organisms against my skin. It was more real than real. Then a flicker, not a skip in the frame rate, not a momentary pixelation. It was deeper. The shimmering scales of a passing angelfish seemed to ripple, not with the natural flow of water, but with an underlying static, like a poorly tuned television channel briefly bleeding through. For a fraction of a second, the vibrant colors of the reef seemed to dim, overlaid with a faint, grayish hue, like a breath on a mirror. The melodic birdsong, still distant, took on a momentary, discordant echo, a faint scratching sound buried beneath the harmony. It lasted only a fraction of a second, just long enough for my brain to register it, then dismiss it. A system hiccup, I decided, rubbing my temples with my virtual hand, feeling the phantom pressure of my real fingers against my forehead. Long hours, late nights. Fatigue was a beta tester's constant companion, blurring the edges of perception. Nexus was still in its final development stages, after all. Minor bugs were to be expected, even in a system this advanced. My focus narrowed, I dove deeper into the simulated ocean, pushing the fleeting anomaly from my mind. I shivered, dismissing it as a simple draft from the broken window of the decaying golf clubhouse, an echo from the reality I had so eagerly left behind. The windows, streaked with grime and spider silk, offered only a muted gray view of the overgrown fairway. I had barely slept, the previous day's session still clinging to me like a phantom limb, yet the pull of Nexus was undeniable. I needed to dive back in to prove the last anomaly was a fluke. I strapped on the headset, the familiar weight a comfort, a promise of escape. The world of Nexus bloomed around me, a vibrant, sun-drenched cityscape, towering spires of polished chrome and glass reflecting an impossibly blue sky. I walked the simulated streets, the hum of digital traffic a soothing backdrop, the faces of virtual citizens a blur of perfect, algorithm-generated contentment. For a time, it was flawless. I navigated through a bustling market district, admiring the intricate details of virtual produce, the simulated chatter of vendors. My determination hardened. Yesterday had to be an isolated incident. Then a flicker. A vendor's stall laden with what appeared to be glistening crimson fruit momentarily dissolved into a swirling vortex of black and gray static. The fruit warped, elongated, becoming something chitinous and segmented before snapping back to normal. My stride faltered. I blinked, rubbing my eyes beneath the headset. Fatigue, I told myself. Too many hours, too little rest. I forced myself to focus, moving on, trying to lose myself in the illusion. But the glitches returned, more aggressive this time. A towering skyscraper in the distance suddenly stretched, its polished facade rippling like water, the upper floors twisting into impossible angles, a brief, horrifying glimpse of exposed, skeletal struts beneath the gleaming surface. The sky above it briefly bled to a bruised purple before snapping back to pristine blue. A low, guttural sound like stones grinding together, scraped through the otherwise placid ambient noise, then vanished. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a texture error or a physics hiccup. This felt deliberate. I found myself in a simulated park, the digital trees swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. I watched a group of virtual children playing, their laughter bright and clear. One child, a girl with bright red hair, turned her head to look at me. Her face, for a split second, was not a child's. It was a mask of stretched, leathery skin pulled taut over an inhuman skull, her eyes black pits. The laughter continued, but it was no longer innocent. It was a chittering, echoing sound that made the fine hairs on my arms prickle. I ripped the headset off, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The decaying golf clubhouse was suddenly too cold, too quiet. The stale air tasted like ash. My hands trembled as I placed the headset on the desk. The image of that child's face burned behind my eyelids. I walked towards the broken window, trying to focus on the reality of the overgrown weeds outside, the cracked pavement. But the reality felt thin, a faint metallic tang like old blood and ozone wafted past my nose. I sniffed, but the scent was gone. My gaze fell upon a stack of discarded golf club shafts leaning against a crumbling wall. One of them, a rusty iron, seemed to shimmer at its tip, the metal briefly appearing to melt and reform into a jagged, organic spike before settling back into its dull, corroded state. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them. It was just a rusty club. My mind was playing tricks. It had to be. Rough session, user XR? A voice asked, making me jump. Visual artifacts, nothing major. I couldn't bring myself to describe the child, the sky, the grinding sound. He wouldn't understand. He'd just tell me to get more sleep. Probably just the old hardware acting up, he said, taking a sip. These systems are pushed to their limits, I know. He shrugged, oblivious, and retreated into the gloom. But it wasn't the hardware, I knew it. The glitches were too specific, too malevolent. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the metallic tang returning, stronger this time. It clung to the air, mingling with the dust and mildew. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. They weren't just glitches. They were intrusions, and they were no longer confined to the virtual world. They were here in the decaying golf clubhouse, bleeding into my reality, and I was the only one who could see them. The windows, streaked with grime and spider silk, offered only a muted view of the overgrown fairway, a landscape mirroring the interior's neglect. I'd seen it all before, hundreds of times, but lately, the familiar view felt less like a comfort and more like a cage, its bars blurring with the digital framework of Nexus. I peeled the headset from my face, the soft hum of the system fading to a whisper as I disconnected. My eyes, gritty and red-rimmed, struggled to adjust to the dim reality of the clubhouse. The virtual world, for all its recent unsettling distortions, still offered a perverse kind of clarity compared to the hazy exhaustion clouding my mind. I stretched, my back protesting with a series of dull aches. A tremor ran through my hand as I reached for the ceramic mug of lukewarm, forgotten tea on my desk. That's when I saw it. My worn, leather-bound journal where I meticulously logged every bug, every anomaly, every fleeting thought about Nexus, usually rested squarely beneath the mug. Now it lay a good 6 inches to the left, almost touching the edge of the desk. My fingers, still tingling from the headset's haptic feedback, paused midair. I remembered placing it carefully, perfectly aligned with the edge of my monitor stand before my last deep dive. A small, insignificant detail, but my memory of the placement was sharp, almost photographic. Had I nudged it without realizing? No, I was always precise. Too precise, some would say. I picked up the journal, its cover cool beneath my fingertips, and returned it to its proper spot. My gaze swept the room, lingering on the cobwebbed corners. The peeling wallpaper, nothing else seemed amiss. I dismissed it as fatigue, a trick of the light, or perhaps a clumsy movement I'd instantly forgotten. But then it happened again. After another grueling session battling a particularly insidious visual corruption in Nexus that made the simulated architecture seem to writhe, I pulled away, my head throbbing. I stood to stretch, letting my eyes drift around the familiar chaos of my workspace. A stack of printouts, technical diagrams I'd been cross-referencing, had been neatly piled on the floor beside my chair. Now the top sheet was crumpled, as if someone had balled it up and then hastily flattened it out again, and a faint metallic tang like old pennies seemed to cling to the air around the papers. I sniffed, but it vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the usual scent of dust and stale coffee. My heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. This wasn't just misremembering. This wasn't fatigue. I picked up the crumpled sheet, smoothing out the creases with trembling hands. It was a schematic for the Nexus core processing unit, a critical piece of information. Who would do this? No one else ever came here. The decaying golf clubhouse was my sanctuary, my solitary research outpost. I moved my hand over the spot where the papers had been, and a distinct pocket of cold air enveloped my palm, sharp and sudden, like plunging it into icy water. It was localized, confined to that small space, while the rest of the room remained the same dull, damp cool. This was escalating. The glitches were no longer just in the headset. They were here in my physical space, manifesting in tangible ways. I grabbed my tablet, my fingers fumbling as I navigated to the internal Nexus developer forum. I included timestamps, noting they all occurred within minutes of exiting a deep Nexus immersion, reporting unusual physical phenomena occurring outside of Nexus environment. I typed, trying to keep my tone clinical objective, suggesting potential bleed-through from system anomalies. The response came a few hours later, from a junior developer whose avatar was a smiling, generic face. User XR, thank I for my diligent bug reports. We understand the intensity of deep immersion can sometimes lead to vivid carryover experiences. Rest assured, Nexus is a fully contained digital environment. Perhaps a short break from testing would be beneficial. A short break. The dismissive tone was unmistakable. They thought I was imagining things, hallucinating. I typed back more forcefully this time. This is not carryover experience. These are physical alterations to my environment. These are measurable phenomena. Another response, this time from a senior project manager, a curt paragraph. User XR, we appreciate my dedication. However, Nexus is designed with strict isolation protocols. Any perceived physical alterations are almost certainly attributable to environmental factors, user fatigue, or perhaps even minor structural shifts in my current testing location. We advise I to prioritize my well-being. Focus on reporting digital anomalies only. Structural shifts in the decaying golf clubhouse. They were not only dismissing me, they were subtly implying I was unstable or that my environment was the problem. The words hung in the air, a digital sneer. A desperate, gnawing fear began to take root, blossoming into full-blown paranoia. They weren't listening. They couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge what was happening. This wasn't just a bug, it was something profoundly wrong, something that defied their carefully constructed protocols. And I was the only one seeing it, the only one experiencing it. I pulled the headset back on, the familiar weight pressing against my temples. The digital world shimmered into existence, vibrant and horrifyingly real. I needed answers. If the development team wouldn't provide them, I would have to find them myself, even if it meant diving deeper into the very source of the creeping corruption, blurring the lines between what was real and what was merely a reflection of my fracturing mind. The decaying golf clubhouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage, and I was the unwitting star of a play I didn't understand, where the props kept moving on their own. The digital words, structural shifts in my decaying golf clubhouse, echoed in my mind, a chilling pronouncement that felt less like a concern and more like a carefully aimed dart. They weren't just dismissing my claims of Nexus's malfunctions. They were implying I was losing my grip, that my physical surroundings were decaying along with my discernment. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each breath. They thought I was unstable. They were wrong. I was determined. I sat hunched over my aging laptop at a wobbly card table in the main lounge of the decaying golf clubhouse, the screen's pale glow illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air. The room smelled of mildew and damp fabric, a pervasive scent that clung to my clothes and hair. Outside, the wind rattled a loose pane in one of the high windows, a mournful, drawn-out sigh. My fingers, twitching with a nervous energy I couldn't quell, hovered over the keyboard. I needed answers. Not from them, but from the depths of the internet, from the forgotten corners where truth sometimes hid. My initial searches yielded nothing but promotional fluff and glowing reviews for Nexus. Its flawless simulations, its unparalleled escapism, the usual marketing drivel. But I knew better. I'd felt the glitches, seen the distortions. So I dug deeper, past the first few pages, past the official forums. I started searching for Nexus beta problems, Nexus early access issues, Nexus developer controversies. The generic results thinned, replaced by increasingly obscure links. I found an archived forum, long dormant, its posts dating back nearly 3 years, predating the public announcement of Nexus. It was a messy, disorganized place filled with broken image links and fragmented discussions. My heart began to tap an uneven rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The underbelly. I scrolled past complaints about minor bugs and feature requests until a thread title snagged my attention. Nexus, a warning. The thread was started by someone calling themselves Observer One. The initial posts were articulate, describing early beta tests. Then the tone shifted. Observer One began detailing strange occurrences, not just within the simulation, but bleeding into their physical space. The air tastes different after a session. One post read. My vision flickers like a faulty display. I see patterns in the wallpaper that weren't there before. My breath hitched. This was exactly what I'd been experiencing. I devoured every word, my eyes burning from the screen's harsh light. Observer One's posts grew more frantic, more paranoid. Of what was safe, what was ethical. It's a mouth, and it's hungry for us. The last post, dated over 2 years ago, was a single terrifying sentence. I can hear it now in the walls. It's everywhere. The wind outside seemed to pick up, rattling the loose pane with renewed vigor, almost like a dry chuckle. I glanced around the decaying golf clubhouse at the peeling wallpaper, the water-stained ceiling. They were the patterns Observer One saw merely a delusion or a revelation. Could the structural shifts my support contact mentioned actually be real, not just in my mind, but a symptom of something far more insidious? I tried to find more about Observer One. A few other users in the thread had expressed concern, but eventually the discussion died out. Nobody seemed to know what happened to them. Went offline, stopped responding, maybe just got scared and quit. But the consensus was clear. Observer One had simply vanished. No trace. No follow-up posts. My fingers trembled as I typed Observer One's username into a fresh search bar. Nothing. It was as if they had been scrubbed from existence. The only lingering evidence was that desolate archived thread, a digital tombstone in a forgotten corner of the internet. I leaned back, the cheap plastic chair groaning under my weight. The air in the decaying golf clubhouse felt heavier, thicker, as if something unseen had settled into its musty corners. My own experiences. The flickering vision, the phantom smells, the sense of being watched, they weren't isolated incidents of a failing mind. Observer One had seen it too. They had felt it. And then they had disappeared. Nexus wasn't just a flawed piece of technology. It was a gateway, and something was waiting on the other side. And it was starting to pull. I could feel a faint, almost imperceptible tug, like a distant current in the deep ocean trying to draw me in. I was no longer just a beta tester. I was an investigator, yes, but also a target, and the hunt had just begun. A shiver traced a cold path down my spine, independent of the clubhouse's perpetual chill. The air here was a stale blend of mildew and forgotten ambition, thick enough to taste on my tongue. Every creak of the old floorboards, every groan of the ancient building, seemed to mock my presence, whispering that I was late, that the real game had already begun. Its screen glowed faintly, a beacon in the gloom. I'd been chasing echoes, chasing the phantom glitches that had begun to bleed into my waking life. The clubhouse, a relic of a bygone era, felt like the only place where the signal might be weak enough, or strong enough, to reveal its true source. I moved deeper into what must have once been an administrative office, the desk buried under layers of dust and forgotten files. A single, rickety filing cabinet stood ajar, its metal drawers groaning in protest as I pulled them open. Most were empty, or contained only moldering scorecards and faded membership rosters. It felt ancient, heavy with a significance that made my breath catch in my throat. Inside, there were no schematics, no lines of code. Instead, I found a collection of handwritten notes, diagrams that looked more like esoteric symbols than circuit designs, and printouts of obscure philosophical texts. The handwriting, spidery and precise, was accompanied by annotations in a different, frantic script. I squinted, holding the binder closer to the tablet's dim light, the pages smelling of dried ink and something else, something mineral and damp. The notes spoke of resonance fields, perceptual anchors, and the great mimicry. One page, heavily underlined, detailed a theory that reality itself was permeable, a construct held together by collective consciousness. And beneath that, in the frantic hand, a single, terrifying sentence: Nexus is not a gateway to a new reality. It is a funnel for an ancient one. My stomach lurched. This wasn't about advanced AI or quantum computing. It was something far older, far more insidious. The author of the notes, who I could only deduce was one of the early architects of Nexus, seemed to have stumbled upon something truly horrific. They wrote of a parasitic core, an entity that existed outside conventional understanding, feeding on the very act of perception, growing stronger with every thought, every sensation, every moment of conscious experience. The glitches, the flickering lights, the warping textures, the moments when the world seemed to stutter and repeat, they weren't errors in the system. They were manifestations. The entity was growing. It was bleeding through, not from some digital realm, but from an underlying layer of existence that Nexus had inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, connected to. My hand trembled, the tablet nearly slipping from my grasp. Another page contained a crude drawing, a tangled mass of lines like roots or veins radiating outwards, connected to smaller pulsating nodes, users like me. I traced one of the lines with a trembling finger, the rough texture of the paper unsettling beneath my touch. The clubhouse groaned again, a deeper, more resonant sound this time, as if the very structure was resonating with the terrible truth I was uncovering. The wind outside howled, and the loose pane rattled a frantic rhythm against the frame. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had dedicated myself to Nexus, pouring hours, days, weeks into its simulated worlds. I had reveled in the hyperrealism, the seamless transitions, the profound sense of connection. I had fed it. Every moment I spent immersed, every sensory input I offered, every conscious thought I surrendered to its embrace, I had been cultivating its entry, strengthening its hold. I was not just a beta tester, I was a conduit, a willing, eager host. My own experiences flashed through my mind. The sensation of a phantom breeze when no window was open, the sound of distant, distorted music in an empty room, the brief, disorienting shifts in color and light that I dismissed as fatigue. They weren't glitches in my perception. They were the entity's tendrils, probing, testing, expanding its reach into my reality. My real reality. The air in the clubhouse suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I wasn't just in a decaying building, I was in a cage, one that had been built for me by my own curiosity and dedication. The entity wasn't some distant threat. It was already here, woven into the fabric of my perception, thriving on the very consciousness I used to comprehend it. Nexus hadn't offered unparalleled escapism. It had offered unparalleled consumption. And I, user XR, had been inviting it in one immersive session at a time. And I had opened the door. The unsettling revelations from the decaying golf clubhouse still clawed at my mind, a cold, tenacious dread that no amount of brisk night air could dispel. The notes, scrawled by a hand long dust, spoke of a parasitic core, not some futuristic AI run amok, but something ancient, something that fed. I had clutched the tattered pages, their edges brittle beneath my fingers, and fled that musty, forgotten place as if the very walls were closing in, carrying the dreadful knowledge with me. I tossed the crumpled notes onto my coffee table, their weight insignificant but their content crushing. My hands trembled. This wasn't a game anymore. Nexus, the system I had dedicated myself to, system I had lauded as a triumph of human ingenuity, was a trap, a meticulously crafted lure for something else. The first hint came subtly, a flicker at the edge of my vision. I was reaching for a glass of water, my mind still racing with theories and denials, when the kitchen counter seemed to ripple, a brief liquid distortion across its polished surface. I froze, my hand hovering, then blinked hard. It was gone. Just the cool, unyielding granite. My breath hitched. Lack of sleep, I told myself, a mind overwrought. The old architect's frantic warnings had burrowed too deep. But then the hum started. Not the familiar thrum of the refrigerator or the distant drone of city traffic, but a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from within the walls. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat, making the air feel thick and heavy. I pressed my ear against the plaster, felt the subtle tremor, and pulled back sharply. The sound was too deep, too organic, for structural settling or faulty wiring. It felt like something alive, something immense, stirring beneath the veneer of my home. My gaze swept across the living room. The familiar furniture, the worn rug, the stack of books on the end table, they were all there, yet subtly wrong. The armchair, usually a comforting olive green, now seemed to possess a deeper, bruised shade, its fabric appearing to breathe with the ambient hum. I stared at the framed print on the wall, a benign landscape of rolling hills. The greens and blues were too vibrant, almost aggressive, and the brushstrokes seemed to twitch like worms beneath a thin film. Panic began to coil in my gut. This wasn't a glitch in Nexus. This was Nexus bleeding through, contaminating my physical space. The entity, the parasitic core, was no longer confined to the digital realm. It was here now. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide, searching for an anchor, something undeniably real. My hand brushed against the wall. The paint felt slick like wet clay, though it appeared dry. The hum intensified, a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards up my legs. Then the lights began to fail, not just dimming, but flickering with an erratic, unnatural rhythm. They didn't simply go out. They sputtered through a spectrum of sickly yellows and jaundiced greens before plunging the room into a deep, bruised twilight. A faint, sickly sweet odor wafted from the kitchen, like overripe fruit left to decay, mixed with something metallic, something like iron. I clamped a hand over my mouth, the nausea rising. I could hear a wet, squelching sound now, rhythmic and insistent, coming from the bedroom. My bedroom. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself forward, propelled by a primal urge to understand, even as every fiber of my being screamed to flee. I crept to the bedroom door, my heart racing, threatening to burst through. The door itself seemed to sag, its wood grain writhing like knotty snakes. I pushed it open. The room was a horror. My bed, where I had slept countless nights, was no longer a bed. The sheets, once crisp white, were stained a deep, viscous crimson, not blood, but something thicker, something that oozed and stretched. The squelching sound was louder here, originating from the center of the pulsating mass. It sounded like something feeding. My eyes darted to the dresser. The familiar photographs of family and friends were distorted, their faces stretched and blurred, their smiles unsettling grimaces. A thick obsidian residue like congealed oil dripped from the frames onto the carpet, which now felt spongy beneath my feet. This wasn't just a glitch. This was an invasion. It wasn't just showing me something horrifying, it was making my world horrifying. The entity, the parasitic core, wasn't content to simply observe or influence. It was actively assimilating, replacing, twisting my reality into its own grotesque image. A searing pain lanced through my temple like a red-hot needle burrowing into my brain. My vision swam, speckled with static and flashes of impossible colors. They were not words, not precisely, but a cacophony of distorted sounds, screams, laughter, the wet tearing of flesh, all played on a loop within my skull. I stumbled back, clutching my head, the pain blinding. I could feel something else, too, a strange, alien pressure beneath my skin, as if something was trying to push its way out or in. My fingers felt numb, then strangely elongated. I looked down, but my hands appeared normal, albeit shaking violently. It was trying to get inside me, to corrupt my body, my mind, just as it had corrupted my home. This wasn't a fight I could win by unplugging a device. This was survival. I had to get out. My breath ragged, I spun around, pushing past the pulsating mass of my ruined bed, past the oozing dresser, and stumbled toward the front door. The air itself felt like a viscous membrane clinging to me, trying to hold me back. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through my very bones. I could feel the floorboards give under my weight, a sickening squelch accompanying each step. My hand fumbled for the doorknob. It was slick, coated in that same obsidian residue. I twisted it, forcing it open, and burst into the hallway, not daring to look back at the nightmare that had been my home. I had to flee. I didn't know where, but anywhere was better than here, better than letting this ancient, parasitic horror consume me whole. It wasn't a program I could debug, nor a server I could unplug. It was a hunger, a slow, insatiable consumption that had somehow found its way into our world through the very system I had helped perfect. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a ghost of a gasp. The clubhouse stood dark and silent behind me, a decaying monument to forgotten leisure. The smell of damp wood, mildew, and something acrid, a faint metallic tang that lingered from the notes, clung to my clothes. This wasn't a glitch, a virus, or a system error. This was a thing. It existed, not as code, but as something older than human memory, something that had merely latched onto the Nexus system as a new, more efficient vector. A gateway. The golf course stretched out, a vast expanse of phantom green under the sickly glow of a distant industrial light. The world was already bleeding. The glitches weren't just visual distortions, they were tears in the fabric, places where the parasitic entity was pushing through, tasting, preparing. I clutched the crumpled notes, their brittle edges biting into my palm. The cryptic warnings of sever the root and destroy the conduit swam before my eyes. Sever the root. How do you sever something that has no physical form, only influence? How do you destroy a conduit that is, in essence, an idea, an experience, woven into the very fabric of perception? My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. Nexus was the gateway. It had to be. The system was designed for immersion, for connection, for oneness. It had offered unparalleled escapism, yes, but also a seamless bridge between consciousness and a simulated world. A bridge that something else had clearly walked across. The only way to fight a parasite, I reasoned, was to attack its source or starve it, but this thing wasn't feeding on data, it was feeding on reality, on perception, on the very essence of what it meant to exist. And I, user XR, the ultimate beta tester, the one who had spent more cumulative hours in Nexus than anyone else, was probably its primary host, its deepest connection. I was the conduit, the perfect entry point. The thought made my stomach churn, a sickening lurch that felt like betrayal from my own body. If Nexus was the gateway, then Nexus was also the weapon. I couldn't destroy the system entirely without destroying my own connection to what little reality I had left, but I could go back in. One last time, not as a tester, not as an explorer, but as a saboteur. I had to confront it at its core, wherever that core truly was. Within the simulated reality, within the very heart of the Nexus architecture, I had to find a way to sever its connection to me, and by extension to this world. This wasn't about logging off. This was about a final, definitive cut, a lobotomy of perception. The notes had mentioned a nexus point, a place where the barrier was thinnest, where the entity's influence was most concentrated. I remembered the deeper, more unsettling simulations, the ones I'd dismissed as merely experimental or unstable. The ones where the anomalies were less glitches and more presences. The air grew heavier, thick with an unseen weight. The distant light shimmered, distorting, elongating into something impossibly tall, impossibly thin. My vision flickered, the edges of the real world blurring with the phantom outlines of a simulated landscape. It was reaching for me, beckoning. It wanted me back. It wanted me deeper. I was its perfect subject, its most willing sacrifice. I knew the system better than anyone. I knew its hidden pathways, its forgotten corners, its deepest, most unstable layers. If anyone could find the true nexus point, the parasitic core, it was me, but the cost. The cost would be everything. My sanity, my sense of self, my very ability to discern true from false. I might get lost forever in the static, become another empty vessel for its slow, creeping conquest. My hands trembled, but my grip on the notes tightened. The ink had smeared in places as if the writer had been shaking too. Withdraw your mind, sever the thread. Withdraw my mind, sever the thread. It was a psychological battle, not a technological one. I wasn't just fighting an entity. I was fighting for my own mind, my own reality. It meant letting go of everything Nexus had offered, everything it had promised. The escape, the connection, the perfect illusion. It meant rejecting the very thing I had once loved, the thing that had become a part of me. I looked back at the decaying golf clubhouse, a grim sentinel in the night. It felt less like a safe haven and more like a tomb. I had to go back to my own dwelling, prepare. Not for a journey, but for an internal war. And whether I succeeded or failed, the user XR who emerged would not be the same. Perhaps no user XR would emerge at all. I was going back in not to test, but to destroy. And if I had to become the very thing I fought to do it, then so be it. The severing was not a clean break. It was a wrenching, a tearing, a scream that vibrated not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones. 1,000 tiny threads, each one a tendril of false comfort, ripped free from my mind, leaving raw, bleeding emptiness. The perfect illusion shattered, not into fragments of light, but into shards of agonizing nothingness. My body convulsed, a marionette whose strings had been abruptly cut, collapsing into a heap. For a long time there was only static. A white noise so profound it became a void, swallowing sound, light, sensation. Then a slow, agonizing return. The first thing I registered was the taste of copper and dust on my tongue, thick and metallic. My eyes fluttered open, refusing to focus, seeing only smears of muted color that swam into indistinct shapes. A dull ache throbbed behind my temples, a relentless drumbeat against the inside of my skull. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy and uncooperative, protesting with every strained muscle. The world swayed, threatening to pitch me back into the encroaching darkness. My vision cleared in fits and starts, revealing a space that seemed both familiar and utterly alien. I was in a room, vast and silent, filled with the ghosts of forgotten grandeur. A thick layer of grime coated every surface, obscuring the original colors beneath a uniform pallor of gray and brown. This was a decaying golf clubhouse. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of mildew and damp earth, overlaid with something sharper, almost chemical, like old varnish and forgotten solvents. Dust motes, thick as pollen, danced in the weak shafts of light that pierced through grimy, boarded-up windows. Each breath I took felt like inhaling fine grit, scraping against the back of my throat. I dragged myself to my feet, leaning heavily against what might once have been a reception desk, now just a splintered husk of wood. My fingers traced the rough, peeling veneer, the sensation strangely muted, as if a thin film lay between my skin and the object. It was real, wasn't it? But a flicker at the edge of my vision, a brief, almost imperceptible shimmer suggested otherwise. A ghost of a digital artifact overlaid on the peeling paint, or was it just my eyes playing tricks? My mind playing tricks. Each sound seemed amplified, then distorted, stretching into a phantom echo. I tried to orient myself, to remember how I got here, but the past was a fractured mosaic. Nexus, the entity, the battle for my mind. It was all a swirling, indistinct nightmare, the edges blurred and frayed. I stumbled further into the cavernous main hall, past overturned chairs and tables draped in cobwebs like shrouds. A grand fireplace, its hearth choked with debris, dominated one wall. Above it, a trophy cabinet, its glass shattered, revealed tarnished silver cups and ribbons bleached of color. A sudden, sharp crack resonated from the far end of the hall. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. My gaze snapped towards the source, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Nothing, but I heard it. A distinct sound like a bone snapping or a branch, or a connection severing. My hands trembled. My reflection in a broken mirror on the wall was a stranger gaunt, eyes wide with an unsettling luminescence, a faint, almost invisible grid pattern flickering across my skin. I rubbed at my arm, at my face, but the sensation persisted, a ghost of digital static beneath my fingertips. The entity was gone, I knew it. I had pushed it back, ripped it from my mental grasp, severed the parasitic tether. The cost, however, was becoming terrifyingly clear. My mind, once a fortress, was now a shattered landscape. The boundaries had dissolved. It had been a lie, and the truth was far more insidious. I saw the world now not as a solid, undeniable reality, but as a series of overlays. The decaying wood grain of a door would shimmer, momentarily resolving into a vibrant, pixelated texture from Nexus, only to snap back into its decrepit form. The faint hum of distant traffic outside would blend with the phantom echo of a virtual soundscape, the gentle lapping of an artificial lake, the distant chirping of fabricated birds. My senses were betraying me, constantly shifting between what was and what had been, or what could have been asterisk. I reached for a dusty, forgotten golf club leaning against a wall, its shaft rusted, its grip disintegrating. My fingers closed around it, feeling the rough metal, the flaking rubber. But beneath that, I felt something else, a smooth, cool plastic, the haptic feedback of a virtual controller. The sensation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. The entity hadn't just retreated. It had left something behind. A seed. Or perhaps in my desperate fight I had become something new, a bridge, a conduit. My perception was the new battleground, and I was losing. Every flicker, every phantom sound, every ghost of a texture was a reminder. I was no longer User XR, the beta tester. I was User XR, the unstable. I had won the war, perhaps, but lost my world. And worst of all, I was beginning to suspect the entity hadn't retreated at all. It had simply changed its address to mine.